It was just another ordinary Tuesday, the kind where you're counting the hours until your shift ends and you can finally go home. I was working the register at the store, a soul-sucking job, but it paid the bills, and things were moving at their usual snail's pace. The fluorescent lights were buzzing overhead, a constant reminder of how much I hated this place. But I had no idea that by the end of the day, I'd be rethinking every decision that led me to that moment. The shift had been pretty uneventful up until around 3 p.m. That's when Brian walked in. He wasn't on the schedule, which was weird. Brian was a stockroom guy, not the friendliest person, but he kept to himself, which was fine by me. But that day he had this energy about him. His eyes were darting around like he was trying to keep track of everything at once, and his hands wouldn't stay still. "Hey, Brian," I said, forcing a smile because, polite workplace stuff. He didn't respond, just kept walking, heading straight for the break room. That's when I should have known something was off. Normally, he'd at least grunt or nod, but not this time. He was muttering under his breath, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. I told myself he was probably just having a bad day. Everyone has bad days, right? The store wasn't busy, just a couple of customers browsing and the usual mix of coworkers doing their thing. Nothing screamed imminent disaster. But then I heard it. A loud crash from the back, like someone had knocked over a whole shelf of inventory. Everyone froze for a second, looking toward the stockroom. "Brian, you okay back there?" Our manager, Laura, called out, trying to keep it light. No response. I exchanged a look with Jamie, the girl working the floor, and she shrugged. Laura sighed and walked to the back to check on him. A few seconds later, we all heard shouting. Not Laura shouting, Brian. His voice was low and guttural, nothing like his usual tone. Then there was another crash and Laura came storming out, her face pale. "Everyone stay out of the back," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "Brian's upset. I'm calling the police." That's when the tension in the room skyrocketed. You could feel it in the air, like a rubber band stretched way too tight. I wanted to believe it wasn't as bad as it seemed, but then Brian appeared and all hope of that went out the window. He came out of the stockroom carrying a metal pipe he must have grabbed from the maintenance closet. His shirt was ripped and there was this wild look in his eyes, like he wasn't seeing any of us, just whatever was playing out in his mind. "Everybody shut up," he screamed, even though no one was talking. A couple of customers bolted for the door, but Brian moved fast, slamming it shut and locking it with a key I didn't even know he had. Now we were trapped. "What the hell, Brian?" Laura tried to keep her voice calm, but you could hear the tremble underneath. "Just put the pipe down, okay? Let's talk about this." Brian laughed, a cold, humorless laugh that sent shivers down my spine. "Talk? Talk? You think talking's gonna fix this?" He started pacing, the pipe swinging in his hand. "You think I don't know what you all say about me? Behind my back to my face, I hear it. I hear all of it." Jamie was standing near me, her hand gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles were white. "What do we do?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. My brain was stuck between fight or flight, but neither option felt remotely safe. Brian started smashing things, displays, shelves, anything within reach. The sound of shattering glass and snapping wood filled the store. One customer, an older guy, tried to reason with him, stepping forward with his hands up. "Hey man, no one here wants trouble. Just let us go, and we won't say anything." Brian turned on him so fast it was like watching a predator lock onto prey. "You think I care about what you'll say?" He swung the pipe, barely missing the guy's head, and the man scrambled back, tripping over a fallen display. Brian laughed again, but it wasn't just anger, it was something unhinged, something that made my stomach churn. Laura tried to move toward the phone behind the counter, but Brian caught her. "Don't even think about it," he snapped, pointing the pipe at her like it was a weapon. She froze, her hands raised, and for a second, everything went silent except for our breathing. Then Jamie's phone buzzed. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet, and Brian's head whipped around. He stalked toward her, and I panicked. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest thing, an empty coffee mug from the counter, and chucked it at him. It hit his shoulder, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to get his attention. "Leave her alone," I yelled, my voice shaking. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity. I thought he was going to come at me, but instead he just laughed. "You're brave now, huh? You think you're a hero?" Before I could respond, there was a loud pounding on the glass doors. The police. Someone must have hit the silent alarm. Maybe Laura, maybe one of the customers. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. Brian didn't drop the pipe or back down. If anything, he seemed even more agitated. "They're not taking me," he screamed, running back toward the stockroom. The police burst in seconds later, guns drawn, shouting commands. They surrounded the stockroom entrance, and for a terrifying moment I thought Brian was going to come out swinging. But then we heard the pipe drop and the officers rushed in. When they brought him out in handcuffs, he was muttering to himself, his eyes darting around like he didn't even recognize us. They escorted him out, and just like that it was over. Except it wasn't. Not really. The store was wrecked, broken shelves, shattered glass, merchandise scattered everywhere. But that wasn't what stuck with me. It was Brian's face, that wild, empty look in his eyes. I kept replaying the moment he pointed the pipe at Laura, wondering what would have happened if the cops hadn't shown up when they did. I didn't sleep that night or the night after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brian. His laughter, his anger, the way he swung that pipe like it was nothing. I don't work at that store anymore, but I still get nervous whenever someone's too quiet or seems a little off. Because now I know, sometimes the people who seem harmless are the ones you need to fear the most. Working the late shift at a busy gas station, you see all sorts of people. Most nights it's routine. A mix of tired truckers, restless travelers, and the occasional sketchy character passing through. But this night was different. It started with a sound I couldn't ignore. The faint, heart-wrenching sobs of a child. It was just past midnight, and the place was empty, as it usually is at that hour. The sobs weren't loud, but they cut through the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional beep of the coffee machine. I stepped out from behind the counter, peering through the glass doors into the parking lot. That's when I saw her, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, standing near the curb with tears streaming down her face. She was clutching a stuffed bunny that looked like it had seen better days. At first I thought maybe her family was just inside their car, and she'd wandered off. But when I stepped outside, I didn't see any vehicles nearby. The lot was empty except for the flickering streetlight casting eerie shadows across the asphalt. "Hey there," I said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" She sniffled, her tiny shoulders trembling as she held the bunny tighter. "My mommy went to the bathroom and didn't come back." Her voice was so small, so scared. I felt my stomach knot. When did this happen? Where's the bathroom she went to? She pointed toward the side of the building where the outdoor restroom doors were. It wasn't uncommon for people to stop and use them, especially during long trips. But the idea of a parent just vanishing didn't sit right with me. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm for her sake. "Let's check it out. Maybe she just got a little turned around." She hesitated, but eventually nodded, her little hand gripping mine as we walked toward the restrooms. The air felt heavier as we approached. The lights above the doors buzzed faintly, and the shadows seemed deeper here, like the light didn't quite reach far enough. "Stay right here," I told her, not wanting her to see anything that might upset her more. I pushed open the door to the women's restroom. It was empty, clean even. There was no sign of anyone. I checked the men's room, just in case. Same thing, nothing. No bags, no belongings, no sign anyone had been there recently. I stepped back out, trying to figure out what to do next. The girl was still standing where I left her, her bunny dangling from one hand now. "Are you sure this is where she went?" I asked gently. She nodded, but her eyes were wide, like she wasn't entirely sure anymore. She told me to wait in the car, but then I got scared and came to find her. The car. I hadn't seen any vehicles, but maybe it was parked somewhere further out. I asked her to show me, and she led me to the edge of the lot, where the faint outline of tire tracks disappeared into the darkness of the nearby woods. My chest tightened. "Did your mommy go into the woods?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "I don't know," she whispered. "I just waited and waited." I stood there staring into the trees, debating what to do. My phone was back inside, and I didn't want to leave her alone again. I thought about calling the police, but something about the situation felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the unease was growing, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Then a noise, a faint rustling in the woods. My breath caught. The girl noticed it too, her eyes darting toward the sound. "Mommy?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Stay here," I said quickly, though my own nerves were screaming at me to stay put. I stepped toward the tree line, squinting into the darkness. "Hello? Is someone out there?" Nothing. And then, just as I was about to turn back, there was movement. A figure stepped out from the shadows. At first, I thought it was the girl's mother, but as they got closer, my stomach dropped. It was a man, tall, scruffy, and carrying something in his hand, something metallic that caught the light. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What are you doing out here?" He didn't answer, just stopped a few feet from the trees staring at me. I took a step back, my heart pounding. The little girl was still behind me, clutching her bunny, and I knew I had to keep her safe. "Is this your kid?" I tried again, though I knew the answer. He tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me, and then he smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, calculated. I felt my hands shaking as I instinctively stepped in front of the girl. "You need to leave," I said, my voice firm now. "The police are on their way." That was a lie. I hadn't called anyone yet, but I hoped it would scare him off. Instead, he took another step forward, and that's when I saw what he was holding. A crowbar. My brain screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. "Get inside," I whispered to the girl, nudging her toward the gas station. "Lock the door and don't open it for anyone." She hesitated, tears spilling down her cheeks, but she listened. As she ran, the man started moving faster, and I knew I couldn't just stand there. I grabbed the nearest thing, a loose chunk of concrete from the lot, and held it up like a weapon. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. For a moment, he stopped, his eyes flicking between me and the gas station. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared back into the woods, his silhouette vanishing into the shadows. I didn't wait to see if he'd come back. I grabbed the girl and locked us both inside the gas station, bolting the doors and calling the police. They arrived about 15 minutes later, but by then, the man was long gone. They searched the area but found nothing. No car, no mother, nothing to explain what had happened. To this day, I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. The little girl was taken into protective custody, and I was left with more questions than answers. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that rustling in my mind, still see that cold smile. And I wonder, did I save her just in time or was I too late? I never thought a quick trip to the store could turn into one of the most terrifying moments of my life. It was late, close to midnight, and I just wanted to grab some milk and snacks for the next day. The store was mostly empty, just a few other stragglers, and the parking lot was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the asphalt like something out of a horror movie. I parked near the entrance, figuring it was safer that way. As I walked in, I noticed a guy loitering near the shopping cart return. He looked disheveled, baggy hoodie, dirty jeans, and this wild, erratic energy that made me uneasy. I told myself to focus on my errand and not overthink it. After all, it's not unusual to see someone hanging around outside a store late at night. Inside, I grabbed what I needed and checked out quickly. The cashier barely looked at me as they rang me up, and I remember thinking how eerily quiet it was. No chatter, no beeping from other registers. Just the faint hum of the store lights. When I stepped back outside, the guy was still there, but now he was pacing. My car was only a few spots away, but the second I hit the unlock button, his head snapped in my direction. He froze for a moment like a predator spotting prey, then started walking toward me, fast. I felt a jolt of adrenaline as I hurried to my car, fumbling with the grocery bag in one hand and my keys in the other. Before I could even open the door, he was right there, standing too close, his breath visible in the cold night air. "Hey, you got $1?" he asked, his voice slurred but demanding. "Sorry, man, I don't have any cash," I replied, keeping my tone calm but firm. I tried to open my car door, but he stepped closer, blocking me. "Come on, just $1, he pressed, his tone growing sharper. "Don't lie to me." I glanced around the lot, hoping someone else was nearby, but it was empty. Even the store entrance seemed farther away than it actually was. My pulse was racing as I weighed my options. I didn't want to escalate things, but something about his eyes, wild and bloodshot, told me this wasn't going to end with a polite no. "I really don't have anything," I said, trying to edge around him. That's when he snapped. He slammed his hand against the roof of my car, the sound echoing through the parking lot. "Don't lie to me," he shouted, his voice cracking with anger. "You think you're better than me?" I froze, clutching my keys so tightly they dug into my palm. He started pounding on the hood of my car, yelling incoherently, his words blending into an angry roar. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but my body felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot. Then he lunged at the driver's side door, trying to yank it open. Thank God I hadn't unlocked it yet. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest as I hit the panic button on my key fob. The car's alarm blared, piercing the silence of the night, and for a split second it startled him. He looked around, his rage momentarily replaced by confusion. But then he doubled down, slamming both fists against the window. "Turn it off," he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "Turn it off right now." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the keys. I backed away, inching toward the store, but he didn't seem to care about me anymore. He was fixated on the car, punching and kicking it like it had personally offended him. That's when I heard the sound of a car engine revving. I turned to see another vehicle pulling into the lot, a beat-up truck with its headlights glaring. The guy noticed it too, and for the first time he looked unsure. The truck stopped a few feet away, and the driver, a big burly guy in a flannel shirt, rolled down his window. "Hey, what the hell's going on here?" the driver shouted, his voice booming. The guy hesitated, his bravado faltering. He took a few steps back from my car, muttering something under his breath, and then bolted, disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the lot. The driver parked and got out, his boots crunching against the asphalt as he approached me. "You okay?" he asked, his tone softer now. I nodded, though I could barely get the words out. Yeah, I think so. Thank you." He glanced at my car, which now had a few dents and scratches, but was otherwise intact. "Lucky he didn't do more damage. You should call the cops." I nodded again, still trying to process what had just happened. The driver waited with me until the police arrived, his presence a comforting reminder that not everyone out there is a threat. When the cops showed up, I gave them a description of the guy, but I wasn't holding out much hope they'd find him. As I drove home that night, every shadow and movement in my peripheral vision felt like it could be him. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him running after me. It's been weeks, but I still can't shake the fear. Every time I park somewhere at night, I find myself looking over my shoulder, gripping my keys like a weapon. I know it's irrational. He's long gone, just another random encounter in a world full of them. But the memory of his wild eyes and the sound of his fists on my car stays with me. A constant reminder that sometimes danger is closer than you think. I'd just clocked in for my shift at the store, already dreading the monotony of another 8 hours of stocking shelves and dealing with impatient customers. It was mid-afternoon, and the place was buzzing with the usual crowd. Moms with screaming kids, teenagers browsing aimlessly, and older folks meticulously inspecting every price tag. It felt like any other day, but it wasn't. I was manning the self-checkout area, watching for people who needed help scanning produce or the occasional shopper trying to sneak an item past the scanner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was easy enough. That's when I noticed him. He looked like he didn't belong. Scruffy clothes, a hoodie pulled low over his face, and a jittery energy that made me uneasy. He was hovering near the canned goods aisle, tossing glances over his shoulder every few seconds. My gut told me something was off, but I didn't want to assume the worst. People get weird in public for all kinds of reasons. He eventually grabbed a basket and started moving through the aisles, But he wasn't shopping. He wasn't looking at prices or comparing brands. He was stuffing items into his basket with no rhyme or reason. A few cans here, a box of cereal there. Then he moved to the electronics section and slid a Bluetooth speaker into his hoodie pocket. That's when I knew. I alerted the manager, Stacy, who was nearby. She sighed, muttering something about how this always happened on her shift, and told me to keep an eye on him while she called security. I nodded, trying to act casual as I continued to watch him. He was making his way toward the exit now, his basket practically overflowing with stolen goods. Stacy intercepted him near the doors, blocking his path. "Excuse me, sir. I need to see your receipt," she said firmly but politely. He froze for a second, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "I don't have one," he muttered, his voice low. "Well, then I'm going to have to ask you to put those items back," she replied, crossing her arms. That's when things spiraled out of control. He dropped the basket, the sound of canned goods hitting the floor echoing through the store. From his hoodie pocket, he pulled out a knife, a long serrated blade that caught the fluorescent light. "Back off," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. The store went silent. Shoppers froze in place, some clutching their carts, others slowly backing away. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I glanced at Stacy, who had taken a step back, her face pale but composed. "Sir, you don't want to do this," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just put the knife down, and we can talk." But he wasn't listening. His eyes were wild, his grip on the knife shaking as he waved it around. "I need this stuff, don't you get it? I don't have a choice," he screamed. A few customers bolted for the exits, their footsteps loud against the tile floor. Others stayed frozen, unsure of what to do. I wanted to run too, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. Stacy was trying to keep him calm, but it wasn't working. He started pacing, his movements erratic, the knife still in his hand. Then he turned toward me. "You!" he shouted, pointing the blade in my direction. "Do you think I'm joking? Do you?" I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry and my mind was racing. What was I supposed to say? To do? Every survival instinct was screaming at me to stay still, not to provoke him. I raised my hand slowly, trying to show him I wasn't a threat. "Just take whatever you need," I stammered. "No one's stopping you." His expression shifted, almost like he was considering it. But then, out of nowhere, another employee, a guy from the stockroom named Kevin, decided to play hero. He stepped out from behind a display, holding a mop handle like a weapon. "Put the knife down, man," Kevin said, his voice firm but shaky. "You don't want to hurt anyone." The shoplifter snapped. He lunged toward Kevin, swinging the knife wildly. Kevin jumped back, the mop handle clattering to the floor as he stumbled. Shoppers screamed and scattered, some ducking behind shelves, others rushing for the doors. I dove behind the self-checkout station, my heart racing as I tried to stay out of sight. Stacy was yelling something, I couldn't make out what, but the commotion was deafening. I peeked out just in time to see the shoplifter grab a woman by the arm, dragging her toward the doors. She was crying, begging him to let her go, but he pressed the knife against her side, using her as a human shield. "Stay back," he screamed, his voice hoarse. "I'll do it, I swear I'll do it." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It felt like time had stopped, the entire store holding its breath as we waited to see what he'd do next. That's when the sound of sirens cut through the chaos. The police had arrived. Blue and red lights flashed through the front windows, and a voice over a megaphone ordered him to drop the knife. For a moment he hesitated, his grip on the woman loosening. Then with a guttural scream, he shoved her away and bolted toward the back of the store. The cops stormed in, their weapons drawn, shouting commands as they pursued him. I stayed crouched behind the checkout station, my hands trembling as I listened to the chaos unfold. I heard yelling, the clatter of shelves being knocked over, and then, finally, the sound of someone being tackled to the ground. When it was over, the shoplifter was dragged out in handcuffs, his face twisted in rage and despair. The woman he'd grabbed was shaken but unharmed, and Kevin was standing off to the side, visibly shaken but trying to play it cool. Stacy was talking to the police, her hands gesturing wildly as she recounted what had happened. As for me, I stayed behind the self-checkout station for a long time, trying to calm my racing heart. Even now I can still see the flash of the knife, hear the panic in his voice, feel the weight of the moment when I thought someone might actually die. I've worked a lot of shifts since then, but I've never felt safe in that store again. Every time I see someone acting even slightly suspicious, my mind goes straight back to that day. And every time I hear a loud noise like a dropped can or a slammed door, I feel my chest tighten, my breath catch. Some things you just don't shake. I'll never forget that Black Friday, mostly because I'm shocked I walked away from it. I'd worked retail for years, but nothing had prepared me for what went down that morning. The store opened at 6 a.m., but people had started lining up around midnight. By 5:30, the line stretched out of the parking lot and around the block. It wasn't just regular shoppers. It was families, groups of teens, and hardcore bargain hunters, all bundled up against the cold, shoving and jockeying for position. I remember looking at them through the glass doors, feeling a mix of dread and disbelief. "They're acting like we're giving this stuff away for free," I joked to my coworker, Lisa, who was setting up near the registers. She didn't laugh. By the time we started unlocking the doors, the crowd was chanting, "Let us in! Let us in!" It was surreal, like some kind of mob scene from a movie. The manager, Greg, was trying to keep it under control, yelling into a megaphone that there was plenty of inventory and no need to rush. Nobody listened. The second the doors opened, the crowd surged forward like a tidal wave. I was stationed near the electronics department, watching the madness unfold on the other side of the store. People were sprinting, grabbing carts, and elbowing each other to get ahead. The sound was deafening, shouting, screaming, carts crashing into shelves. Then I heard a scream. Not the excited kind, this was different. Sharp, panicked. I stepped out from behind the counter to get a better look, and that's when I saw her. A woman, maybe mid-40s, on the ground near the entrance. People weren't just stepping around her, they were stepping on her, trampling her like she wasn't even there. She was crying, her hands flailing as she tried to get up, but the crowd kept coming, wave after wave, knocking her back down. "Greg!" I shouted, but he was already rushing toward the scene. He was yelling at people to stop, but they either couldn't hear him or didn't care. Then, like a domino effect, more people started falling. A man tripped over a knocked-over display, and the people behind him went down too. It was chaos. Absolute chaos. I ran to help, but as I got closer, I could feel the crush of the crowd. It was suffocating. Bodies pressed together. No room to move. I tried to grab the woman's arm, but someone shoved me from behind, nearly knocking me off my feet. "Stop! Everyone, stop!" Greg was screaming into his megaphone, his voice cracking with desperation. That's when it happened. A loud crash echoed through the store as one of the shelves toppled over. People panicked, scattering in every direction. Someone yelled, "It's falling!" And for a second, I thought the entire row of shelves was going to come down. I grabbed the woman and pulled her out of the way, practically dragging her to the side. Her face was pale and she was clutching her ankle, clearly injured. "Thank you," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. But it wasn't over. The stampede had shifted deeper into the store, and I could see Lisa near the toys section, looking terrified as people shoved past her. A kid was screaming, separated from his mom, while two men were practically wrestling over a discounted TV. Greg finally managed to get on the PA system. "Everyone needs to calm down and move to the exits, now." Some people listened, but others didn't. I don't know if it was greed or adrenaline, but the crowd was out of control. More displays were knocked over and merchandise was scattered everywhere. It felt like the whole store was collapsing in on itself. By the time the police arrived, the damage was done. The woman I'd helped was taken out on a stretcher, and a few others were treated for minor injuries. One guy had a broken arm, and another woman was in shock, mumbling about how she couldn't breathe. The store was trashed. Shelves toppled, items ripped open, boxes strewn across the floor. It looked more like a battlefield than a store. And me? I couldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes that night, I saw the woman on the ground, her face twisted in fear as people trampled over her. I don't work retail anymore. I quit a few weeks later. Maybe it's dramatic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that next time I might not be so lucky.